Welcome to the many interpretations of Elasmotherium, a massive rhinoceros that lived in the late Miocene of what is now Central Asia and Eastern Asia, as well as Eastern Europe. They also went extinct around 39,000 to 40,000 years ago, so pretty recent, all things considered, especially when looking at a geological timescale. We have another Cenozoic creature to add to the list. We've talked about very few Cenozoic creatures in this series, so adding another one is really cool, and Elasmotherium in general is just absolutely awesome. Of course, it belongs to the same family as modern-day rhinos, that being the family of Rhinoceratidae. I think that's how you pronounce it. I think I butchered that. But it's important to note that it is a distinctive group of rhinos. It belongs to the Elasmotherinae subfamily, which I think I butchered that too, which is a separate subfamily from modern-day rhinos. The last common ancestor of rhinos, modern-day rhinos and Elasmotherium, was about 45 million years ago. So they are related to them, but distantly related, which means that like insight of their overall appearance with modern-day rhinos can be shaky at best. And that's something we'll find out a little bit more when we look at different design elements of this animal. Without further ado though, let's get right into it. We'll start off with prehistoric park. Hands up if this was your introduction to Elasmotherium, because it definitely was mine. This is where I learned about this animal. Beforehand, I was ignorant, and I only knew about the woolly rhino. I didn't know about Elasmotherium. And it was awesome here. It's portrayed as this massive woolly animal, essentially. It's like covered in brown fur, has this huge hump on its back, and most notably, it has a massive horn on the middle of its forehead. A lot of these elements are speculative, of course. We don't exactly know if it was woolly. It's likely it was because it lived in an environment that would suit that, so it's likely. We do know that the vertebrae on the back and between the shoulders do support a hump, so it's likely that it did have a hump. But one of the biggest debates about this animal is that horn. Of course, we've never actually found a fossilized horn, because if there was a horn present, it would have been made out of keratin, and keratin is one of the first things to decay once an animal dies, which means it doesn't really have the chance to fossilize. Not to say that it never does. Sometimes we do have examples of keratin, like remnants of keratin essentially, but it's very, very rare. All we found on Elasmotherium in the middle of its skull, or in between its eyes, is this giant kind of dome. This looks like it could be the base for a horn, and size estimations have made it pretty big, up to 3 meters, which is an absolutely massive horn. The hump actually seems to support that in theory, because the hump seems to suggest that it would have like a heavy object on its head, so it needed extra support to support that, essentially. But more recent studies have shown that it's kind of unlikely that its horn was that massive. There was like some analysis done on the vertebrae, and it concluded that it wasn't nearly hefty enough to support that large of a horn. So now more recent estimations make it smaller, about half the size of the current horn, if there's even a horn at all, because some reconstructions even just give it a boss that was formed around that dome that we see on the skull. Regardless, it's very confusing, and we don't really have a sound interpretation of it. So whether it had a horn, whether it didn't, it's going to be interesting to find out in the future. Completely forgot to mention this while I was initially recording it, so now I'm adding it now. There is also some possible cave art of what is possibly Elasmotherium that of course depicts it with a horn. I don't think we necessarily have confirmation that this is Elasmotherium. It does quite look like it, but again, that is something that's shaky. So it could possibly be something that gives evidence for a horn being present on Elasmotherium, but at the same time, just kind of do with that information what you will. But here's what that art looks like. But this is a great start. Love its depiction here. I kind of strayed away from that a little bit. Its depiction here is absolutely amazing. It's showcased as this kind of like aggressive, dangerous animal, which definitely does make sense, especially when you look at its modern closest relatives, that being rhinos, of course. Really cool to see it back at the park and kind of integrate into its surroundings, and seeing it run alongside an Ornithomimus flock is just like a really cool thing to see for some reason. I don't know. I just like stuff like that because, of course, those two animals never met each other. Really fantastic design though, and it is probably one of the most iconic ones that we'll see. Next up is Animal Armageddon. This Elasmotherium pretty much has the same idea. It has a massive horn. Like the base of this one in particular is a lot bigger than it was in Prehistoric Park, where that one was a lot more thin. It's also a little bit furry. You know, it's got the brown fur as usual, and it's interesting how pointy those ears are though, like how huge and pointy. But it's also a good design, I would say. It's a pretty, like, it captures the idea of Elasmotherium that we commonly know, regardless on what kind of structure it had on its forehead. Speaking of, it's often known as the Siberian unicorn because of that very famous horn depiction. But as we all know, there's a good chance that it didn't have that horn. So I don't know. We'll move on to the Mandalorian. We're into Star Wars territory. That's what I love to see. You probably know where I'm going with this. It's the Mudhorn. The Mudhorn, this looks like an Elasmotherium, am I right? We all thought Elasmotherium when we saw this. Like, I can't be the only one who thought that. Has a massive horn, it's got brown fur, it's got a very rhino-like appearance, it even has the giant hump in between its shoulders. Like, that is very much an Elasmotherium. So, yeah, alien Elasmotherium, you gotta love it. Look how awesome those teeth are. That actually reminds me of something. Tripping over words. Elasmotherium seems to be the type of animal that had continually growing teeth, which means that they were just constantly growing, similar to a lot of different rodents today. This was probably very beneficial because it probably ate some like really tough plant material, so its teeth would get worn down quite frequently throughout the animal's life. So having those teeth that are constantly regrowing were incredibly beneficial. These weird kind of jagged looking teeth kind of reminded me of that, like just of talking of that. Now, in terms of like the horn placement, it's of course a lot more on the snout instead of in between the eyes like Elasmotherium was. But again, this very much looks like an Elasmotherium, right? There has to be some inspiration taken from it. If there's not, then I'll be very surprised. But it very much is, you know. I think that like looking at prehistoric animals for Star Wars aliens is a great idea because a lot of them do have a very alien-like appearance to them, especially if you go into like the Permian, like if you look at something like Stegosaurus or something like that, like that's very Star Wars. You know, some of those Permian animals, they look like the Reek. Anyway, we'll go ahead and move on to some video games. And the only two Jurassic franchise appearances that we have. The first one is in Jurassic Park Builder. Very interestingly, it doesn't have any fur. It has very sparse fur the more that you level it up, which is very unique. Because of course, there's some reconstructions that do make them fur-less, very similar to modern-day rhinos. And it's interesting to see that here. It's got the massive horn, of course, absolutely huge. It looks like it would be around 3 meters long. And yeah, no, I just like how different, like how unique this one is because it's one of the only ones we're going to see that doesn't have fur, just with some sparse fur, rather. Of course, I don't really know how likely that is, but still very cool. Now here's the Jurassic World the game Elasmotherium. I quite like this guy. I think that everything pretty much matches up. You know, the whole skeletal structure looks really good. It does have some sparse fur, which I think is really interesting, similar to, you know, the previous one that we looked at, which I think that I mentioned that was the only one. How wrong I was. I mean, I'm quite surprised how small they made the horn. I figured that they would have gone the whole 3 meters with it and made it just an absolute massive horn, but they kept it to this, what might be a more realistic size, which I think is really cool. Of course, you know how it goes. You know, there's like, as you level it up, it gets different colors and everything like that. It becomes a little bit more brown. Here's what it looks like at first. You have more of a gray coloration, similar to modern day rhinos, which I think is really cool. This is the one that we currently have. And once you reach level 31 to 40, I was not expecting this. I was expecting them to increase the size of the horn, which they did. But I wasn't expecting them to put extra horns like on the back and in front of the already huge horn. Okay. So that's fun. That's really fun. Very interesting. One of the most unique designs that we have on here. Yeah, very cool. Now we have Jurassic World Alive. Again, it's a little bit more hairless, some sparse hair towards the animal's back. A little bit more of a rhino appearance, of course, with its whole coloration and everything. And they opted to give it a little bit more of a longer horn. Certainly longer than the Jurassic World the game horn. But yeah, I still think it looks really good. We have remained very consistent with the overall quality of Elasmotherium designs. Like, you can certainly tell what they are, you know, which is probably the most important thing when identifying animals like this. But yeah, this is very good. Quite like it again. Now we have my beloved prehistoric kingdom. These guys were recently added, fairly recently, like, well, actually almost like quite a few months ago, of course. And they do, of course, look gorgeous. They're completely furred. This one in particular has the large horn, sporting the large horn, probably not as large as some depictions would often make it look. And the overall just look of it just looks fantastic. I mean, I feel like I'm saying look too much, but it does look really good. Good way to kind of like look at it up close. You get this this structure that's like right in the middle of its forehead, extended up here. The ears, the feet, everything. Everything looks really good. Of course, there is another Elasmotherium model in this game right over here that actually sports more of a boss, has a smaller structure. So they kind of like incorporated both of the most talked about ideas for Elasmotherium in the game. So you can place this one if you lean more towards that side, and you can place the other one if you lean more towards that side. Let's see what Nigel Marvin has to say.
The unicorn comparison goes farther than just the horn. Compared to other rhinoceroses, their legs are longer and more suited to running. I've yet to see one do magic, though.
Yeah, I don't think that's something I've mentioned yet, but that was something that was noted, is how their legs are relatively long in comparison to the rest of their body, indicating that they were decently fast at running, or at least prioritized that to some extent. They likely weren't, winning any incredible races in terms of like huge animals go, but they were probably decently speedy. Now, it's also worth mentioning that alongside Elasmotherium, there was added Sinotherium here. We'll go and place that down too. Now, this guy is often agreed and or just thought to be what Elasmotherium evolved from, and you can definitely see that in its overall skeletal appearance, which is very, very similar to Elasmotherium. This guy lacks the fur, has a kind of like a middle ground in terms of the horn, not nearly as large as this one, but definitely not more of a boss structure like this one over here. And it also looks really good. I always think the Prehistoric Kingdom has fantastic models and just animations and sound design and everything. It just all looks very good. Indeed, my friend. Indeed. But yeah, that is one of my favorites right there. That is Prehistoric Kingdom. And there we have it. A very underutilized animal, which is crazy. Elasmotherium, just this rhino with just a very unique appearance. One that just like has some mystery to it as well, because again, we don't know if it had a boss. We don't know how long a horn would have been if a horn was present. It's likely that it wouldn't have been too large of a horn, or too long of a horn rather, if there was a horn. But it's still very interesting to think about. Elasmotherium uh, is an awesome animal, and it's one that I really do want to learn more about. I hope that we can make more fossil discoveries in the future that offer a little bit more insight about the overall anatomy of this animal, and just like clear up some things that are a little bit foggy as we currently speak. I also hope to see some more depictions of it in media. I think it's a very underutilized animal, and one that has a lot of great potential. Anyway, that is pretty much all I have for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have an awesome day.